Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Contemporary Issues on a soggy Sunday in May. Shouldn't be complaining about the rain, should we? We always need the rain, so we are glad for that. Nice to have you all here. I'm Steve. I want to welcome first-time visitors, Ed and Terry. Nice to have you here. And we are going to talk today about the book called Factfulness. It was recommended to me by a friend, and as I got into it, I thought it was really interesting, an interesting premise that the world is really in much better shape than a lot of us think. Surveys show that a lot of us think poverty is worse, and many of the living conditions are worse than they really are. And so we'll take a look at that today. But before we do that, our usual announcements. Zoomers, please mute yourself on the lower left corner of your screen when you're not talking. Nice to have you with us, Joe and Susan and Grant. And we are recording this for future playback on YouTube for those who can't be here today. And other announcements. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. And any other things we want to promote, things coming up. And I hope you'll look at our classes, other types of classes, because the church always has more going on, and they're advertised mostly on our website, on the studies page for the St. Andrew website. So take a look at that.
So Steve, did you or Vicky's make reservations for that room on the 9th of June for our potluck?
Potluck on June the 9th. I have not. Let me make a note.
Somebody needs to check.
We will do that. Yes, we will do that. June the 9th. We're having a little potluck. So we'll let you know. We'll email Alice what foods to bring, or tell people what foods and beverages to bring. And of course, bring your own pot to the potluck, as we always like to say. That's right.
Bring your own pot.
Yeah, we're in Colorado. That's right.
Bring a hot dish.
Bring a hot dish. Right.
Okay.
Okay. Any other announcements? Anybody been traveling? Like to share anything about traveling? We always like to talk about, for just a minute, something that's in the news also. And I've been thinking about Gaza a lot this week, and the kids that are protesting on the college campuses and the pros and cons about that. What an interesting thing that we haven't seen, right, Gene, since 1968, really, kids on college campuses protesting to this degree, something that they are passionate about. But yes.
A lot of the kids don't even know what they're protesting.
Ann said a lot of the kids don't know what they're protesting, and that's true too. They're kind of one-sided in a difficult issue, but it's kind of nice though to see them be passionate about something and be caring and involved just from that perspective.
Up to 3/4 of them aren't even students.
3/4 of them are not students, Eric says, maybe so.
And some of them are being paid to protest.
So they don't have to go to class.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's part of it too, Joy. That could be.
Some of us.
That's true, but at least they appear to be interested in world events, and good for them in that respect.
But they don't have a right to block the president's house.
They shouldn't be blocking anybody's house or being violent, that's for sure.
No, I
Steve,
think that was a very interesting thing that the Democrats immediately recoiled on, that they learned them from the Floyd riots and stuff like that, that they realized they can't be destructive now. So the Democrats immediately drew a line, then you can do anything you want as long as it's not destructive. So that was a very hard line that was done with it also. But I agree also, the other thing is that the people that are coming in are using the identities of the educational institutions then for their advantage. That's why that so many people are coming in and wanting to particularly take over Columbia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of them are paid to come in.
Some of them are paid to come in, Ann says. Yes, we've heard that too. So maybe that's different from 68. Maybe things have kind of changed since the Vietnam War era. Okay. Well, speaking of things changing, let's take a look at this issue and this book. And I'm going to share screen here and show a little bit about this. Okay, this book is called Factfulness, meaning let's be full of facts. And the subtitle is 10 Reasons Why We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. This is by a Swedish doctor and professor of health in Sweden. And it was written in 2018. So it is a 6-year-old book, but still holds up for accuracy to that point. Since the pandemic, of course, things have slowed down a little bit in some of these improvement areas. But there's a lot of good information here on what has happened and improved in the last 50 to 100 years. The message of the book is world living conditions are improving dramatically, but surveys show that a majority of people think conditions are worse than the facts really warrant when you look at it. So there's an old worldview that needs updating. That is what he proposes. And so I want to start off with some charts, just showing some of these areas. And so I've handed this out in class here and showing it now for the Zoomers. This is in no particular order of category, but we'll just fly through here and look at some of these issues. Plane crash, yeah, I didn't mean that pun, but plane crash deaths, for example, were really high. 1929, when flying was new, 2,100 per 10 billion passenger miles. And look how it's almost flattened to zero now by that category. Child labor, the share of children aged 5 to 14 who work under bad conditions has gone from 28% to less than 10% since 1950. Deaths from disasters like natural disasters has gone down from the 1930s to the present tremendously because of not prevention from the disasters, but the response and other factors. Nuclear arms race, we know, has gone down tremendously also since 1986. 64,000 nuclear warheads down to less than 15,000 today. Smallpox, and this book gets into many of the health areas, the tremendous improvements have been made in immunizations and less disease, especially for children around the world. Smallpox cases since 1850 have dropped almost to zero. Smoke particles and pollution, that one too. Ozone depletion has dropped tremendously since 1989. And hunger, people malnourished. From 1970 was 28% of the people in the world down to less than 11% today. So that's just an overview of some of these categories. Anybody want to comment on anything surprising about those? Yes, Ann.
What about the change in attitude with getting vaccinated though? The measles that we've occurred recently. I have a 34-year-old daughter. Yeah, she was vaccinated earlier, but she's refusing to get any additional COVID, anything vaccinated. And that's a real movement within our country. And school teachers having to face the fact that, you know, students come and parents say it's for medical reasons and exposing kids and staff and children to communicable diseases.
Yeah, I think there's a graph, I'll try and find it here, on the child immunizations too have gone way up across the world, but some pockets like the US where these concerns linger, that has affected it too. Sue or Susie.
I was surprised by the hunger,
Because you see all these TV shows and they show people in Africa and all this and all over the world and they're all hungry. You think, my God.
We're going to get into that, Susie, about why this view persists, and that part of it is the media continually showing us negative pictures. Steve?
So Susie, I had the exact same thing, and of course, I was going to use AI because I can. And the current statistics in the United States is 8.8% of children go to bed hungry now.
Wow.
That is much lower than what I was thinking is the 20%.
It's lower than.
And so now it's 8.8.
Just a side note,
United States. what
In the
about
US,
world?
in the US. I was interested in the US than versus.
I wondered about the world.
I don't know if you guys know this, but in Douglas County School District, they provide breakfast and lunch now for kids and staff, so I can get a lunch. As well as breakfast. I mean, for some reason Dougco does that, but Jeffco
Isn't
doesn't.
that state law? That all children.
On Title
receive
I
lunch?
school lunch, right.
Yeah, it is.
Look at it.
I say that because my granddaughter's complaining about the lunch. It's like,
I think you're right. It's,
We
the
voted on
staff
that.
doesn't get lunch in Dougco, but we get it in Dougco.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, related to that, I want to show you this, what I thought was really a good, interesting chart called Income Levels by Country. And it's this chart with the bubbles on it. I'm sharing it. Can you see it now, Susan, on the screen? This is a chart compiled by this author from UN Statistics that shows, as of 2018, the where each country ranks by income level. So on the left side is income level 1, which is the lowest. These are the really poor countries. And you may be able to see on the very lower left corner, the poorest country in the world is called Central Africa Republic. Above that is Somalia. And then on the kind of the right side, Afghanistan. Above that, Ethiopia. But that'll give you an idea of some of the African centralized focus of the poor countries. Those are the ones that are still in the lowest category. Whoop, didn't mean to lose. Hang with me just a second here.
One of the Uber drivers before Spain, from Republic and from Congo.
I hate that when I
hit the wrong button.
hit the wrong button and you have too many screens open on the thing at the same time.
Picture looks pretty familiar.
The
library.
Yeah.
Oh, I lost it now. I lost my picture. Hang on just a second. I have to get it back here. Chart of the countries. Come back. There we go. There we go. Okay, and so then in the, next to that is level 2. Level 2 in countries. Vietnam, it's top. Bangladesh, surprisingly, has in the last 50 years increased its standard of living and income levels. And
Excuse me,
with other
Steve?
ones, yes,
You're not sharing the screen yet.
what's not sharing?
Yeah,
Okay, sorry, do that over. It showed,
Quick.
there is it screen sharing now, Susan?
yes, that's perfect. Thanks, Steve.
Good, sure, sorry.
But the size of the bubble, based on the population? Yeah.
The size of the bubble is probably population, yes. So level 2 out of the 4 levels, you can see Bangladesh and Vietnam have sizable populations. India and Pakistan are big also. Nigeria, Tanzania, Republic of the Congo. They say these are some that have come up from the most low level to the higher level. Then level 3, China is the biggest one, Brazil, Egypt, and Russia. Russia's kind of on the bubble between level 3 and level 4. And then the rich countries, level 4 at the top, you can see is Japan, And on the right, Singapore, down toward France, lots of European countries are clustered around there, and the US and Saudi Arabia.
I'm surprised Venezuela's in that group.
That's what the book says. You would be surprised at how,
Those people are still.
and how, at least until 2018, how many of these countries have moved up in income level.
One that jumps out at me is North Korea. They've got nuclear weapons and yet dire poverty, if you look at their income.
Where are they all?
They're way down there around $1,500.
Level one.
Priorities.
Yes, yes. Let me read just a couple highlights from the book on this topic of income improvement. We now know that people believe that life in low-income countries is generally worse than it actually is today. But how many people do they imagine live such terrible lives? This author did surveys in his native Sweden and in the United States, and the majority suggested the answer was 50% or more people live in low-income countries. The real figure is 9%. Only 9% of the world lives in low-income countries today. The rest have moved up to level 2 or 3, considered middle class. And this has been done in the last 50 to 75 years. These countries are not nearly as terrible as people think. But there are still countries like Afghanistan, Somalia, and the Central African Republic where they are categorized the worst places on the planet to live.
Forgot Haiti.
Haiti also. In fact, the vast majority of people live somewhere in the middle of the income scale. They are not living in extreme poverty. Their girls go to school, their children get vaccinated, they live in 2-child families, they go on vacations, and step by step, the world is improving. Not every single measure every year, but in general, tremendous improvement has been made in the last 50 to 100 years.
Steve, when were the surveys taken and when was the book written?
The book came out in 2018, and so these surveys and this doctor's work was for the 20 years up to that.
This is
Don't you
Don't you
27.
think a lot of things have changed since COVID?
Yes, we'll talk about that a little bit too, but in general, most of these categories have stayed the same. It's from what I could see on the internet. Yeah. So with that, let me see if I can play for you just 5 minutes of a video with this Swedish doctor explaining about poverty and how people have come out of poverty across the world. Let me see if I can do this. On just a second. Stop for a minute, stop. I need to share the screen first. Okay.
Foundation that we run. And it was started, this project, last year by my boss and also my son, Ola Rosling. He's co-founder and director. And he wanted, Ola told me, we have to be more systematic when we fight devastating ignorance. So already the pilots revealed this, that so many in the public score worse than random. So we had to think about
Well,
Don't freeze on me.
preconceived ideas. And one of the main preconceived ideas is about world income distribution. Look here, this is how it was 1975. It's the number of people on each income. From $1 a day. See, there was one hump here around $1 a day. And then there was one hump here somewhere between $10 and $100. The world was two groups. It was a camel world, like a camel with two humps. The poor one and the rich ones. And there were fewer in between. But look how this has changed. As I go forward, what has changed, the world population has grown, you know, and the humps start to merge. The lower hump merge with the upper hump. And the camel dies and we have a dromedary world. with one hump only. The percent in poverty has decreased. Still, it's appalling that so many remain in extreme poverty. We still have this group, almost 1 billion over there, but that can be ended now. The challenge we have now, you know, is to get away from that, understand where the majority is. And that was very clearly shown in this question. We asked, what is the percentage of the world's 1-year-old children who have got those basic vaccines against measles and other things that we've had for many years? 20, 50, or 80%. Now, this is what the US public and the Swedish answered. And you see, look at the Swedish result, you know what the right answer is. Who the heck is professor of global health in that country? Well, it's me. It's me. You see? It's very difficult, this. It's very difficult. Huh? However, Ola's approach to really measure what we know made headlines, and CNN published these results on their web, and they had the questions there, millions answered, and I think there was about 2,000 comments, and this was one of the comments, you know. I bet no member of the media passed the test, he said. So Ola told me, take these devices, you are invited to media conferences, give it to them and measure what the media know. And ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, the informal result from a conference with US media. And then lately from the European Union media. You see, the problem is not that people don't read and listen to the media. The problem is that the media doesn't know themselves. What shall we do about this, Ola? Do you have any idea?
But then he gets into why these old views persist, in his opinion. And I put that out on our little sheet here called 4 Reasons Why These Old Views Persist. I'm gonna share this on screen here so our Zoomers can see this too. Sorry, hang with me. I think I tried to do too many things today. Too many things at once with the computer.
One in the middle, lower right. Yeah.
There it is. Okay, just so they can see. This doctor says, why do old views persist? The main one is the media focuses on negatives, like Susie was saying. They don't try to give the impression that living conditions across the world are worse than they are, but that is the natural conclusion that we draw when we see so many things. And it's not only the media, it's the reporters, it's the advertising that we see too. If you see the ads that say, show pictures of the children in Africa are starving, the dogs need help from the ASPCA, donate $19 a month to that. It makes it look like conditions are worse than they are. Number 2, he says our brains focus on the negatives as protection from danger, from evolution. When we grew up and evolved from hunter-gatherers, we had to pay attention to when we were being chased by the saber-toothed tiger, and that was much more attention grabbing to us than the happy times in the cave with the baby. So what was most on our minds? Trying to be safe from the saber-toothed tiger, and that still carries forward. Binary brain categorization. We naturally want to see things as either good or bad. So we have grown up with a worldview that things are bad, not necessarily getting better, and we hang on to that as part of the good-bad binary system. And number 4, it's easiest to retain the worldview we first learned, and that change is hard. So maybe we still have the impressions from our teenage or 20s that the world is in bad shape and not necessarily getting better. We don't hear that message very much, backed up by facts, so we retain that worldview that things are bad.
Steve,
What do you think?
maybe it's because he's from Sweden, but he leaves out the part of how politics has shaped our worldview through fear and hatred.
Good point.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Right, right.
How
He
about,
says,
how about what drives the media's focus? Is the clicks on the negative stories, and of course, that's who pays the bills, is the numbers that they can put out.
even more today than
Yeah.
when I was a reporter. I'm an old newspaper reporter and editor. Before the internet came in, and we knew that that was a focus that we did, that negative things got more attention, but even today, more with the clicks and the advertising. It just
How much
drives. it
pressure,
worse.
I'm glad you're sharing your experience. You're with a major newspaper in this country. The subtle, not so subtle, but topics are covered, how they are covered. Can you share just a little bit on what influences were in effect when you were connected with this major newspaper and the difference from today? Do you have some insights there that would be helpful for us?
Well, thank you, Gene. I was a reporter for the large daily in Kansas City called the Kansas City Star, and I covered city government, politics, and business. And so I would really report on just what was going on, good and bad, whatever came up. That's the way I looked at it. But there was always that focus on if it bleeds, it leads. It put the fires and the negative news because they get the most attention. It makes people pick up the newspaper and read, of course. So, and that was never taught to us in journalism school, of course, to be negative, but it was just a natural.
It's a human
Evolution.
reaction, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a human reaction.
How we're drawn to stopping to see
Right.
a tragic automobile accident.
Right,
Right, we're drawn to it. Nobody's telling us we have to do that.
If it's too much though, I turn off the TV or I put the magazine down or whatever. It's like I hit overload and I say, that's enough. No,
Well, there's a percentage that does, but human nature is to be drawn to negative things.
Well, it's the same, take a classroom of kids, who gets the attention? The ones causing the problem.
that's
Not
right.
the ones that are doing what they're supposed to do. following
The rebel.
The rebel.
That's right. I want to give our Zoomers a chance to comment if they'd like to. Grant, how about as being a teacher? What do you think about this? High school teacher. You still with us, Grant?
it's not.
That's okay. Okay. Next section, he talks about why are conditions improving? Number one is income levels are rising in many countries, as we showed in the levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. Education of the populations is rising. Scientific advancements and medical advancements. And those often pushed through the volunteerism to spread immunization and other advances throughout the world. I think of and have read recently on Bill Gates. You know, he and his foundation have done so much for immunization, and we're trying to eradicate diseases in Africa especially. I wouldn't be surprised if his foundation alone has helped a lot of this over the last 30 years to improve. And finally, the internet is advancing the spread of ideas and is helping with all of these things, income, education, and a lot of it, even though the internet has so many negatives to it, it is helping people across the world be connected and improve their quality of life.
It's also spreading false information, so.
Conspiracy theories about vaccines or,
Especially in this country, and that
Yes.
probably isn't the world, but this country, that would be why the immunization thing has become a thing, because of politics and so.
yes,
I think that's more this country than the world, though.
And your communication is instantaneous. I mean, I draw a comparison to when I worked for an attorney and I was on a typewriter all the time. And you might have a document and I have to mail it to another attorney to get it, the signature that's required on this document. Well, there's 3 days or 4 days lapse in communication. Today, within an hour, I can get that signature. It's just.
We can
instantaneous.
DocuSign now.
Pardon?
We can DocuSign
Yeah,
online.
exactly. So instantaneous communication is almost overwhelming. Confusing, overwhelming. Anyway, there you go.
There you go.
Moving right
Good
along.
point.
Moving right along.
He does, in the middle of the book, stop and say, I don't want to make things look too rosy. That of course, there are still many dangers that are facing us today. And remember, this was from 2018 when his book came out. And by the way, this doctor died soon after his book came out of cancer. So, yeah,
Author of this book?
the author of this book, yes. But he was quite prescient in some of these dangers. His number one danger, he thought from all of his research, was global pandemic. In 2018, he predicted the top danger would be a global pandemic.
And that was right before COVID, right?
COVID was 2020.
Yeah.
Remember, it came out 2019, at the end of 2019.
Wow.
And that's also, from what I've read, Bill Gates and his foundation have ranked that as the number one danger in the future too, of another pandemic also coming about too. Number two, financial collapse. And they pointed to the 2008 stock market and bank collapse at that time when the US had to bail, when Obama had to bail out the financial system. They said that things are not in place adequately to prevent that worldwide from happening again. So that is still a high danger.
Subprime mortgages.
Subprime mortgages, right? Number three, world wars. And that's always a continual danger. Number four, climate change. So this was 6 years ago. He was talking about climate change. And number five, extreme poverty, still in those countries that grapple with that. Those are not making great progress.
I'm surprised he left out the drug cartels because La Familia Michoacan in Mexico, they're in all 50 states.
Okay.
And the fentanyl crisis.
There you go.
But there again,
The-
he's talking about the world. He's not talking about the United States.
No, they're all
I
over.
think the United States is the world.
The drug cartels.
Good point.
Drug cartels.
Thank goodness it's not right now.
The drug cartels are real.
Yeah, some of these improvements have slowed since 2018. For example, on poverty, Wikipedia entry says that before COVID-19, the fraction of the world's population living in extreme poverty had fallen below 10% from more than 35% in decades past. But the pandemic not only halted, but reversed some of that progress since the onset of the health emergency in 2020. And so exact numbers have not been tallied yet, but there has been a reverse in the progress of populations coming out of extreme poverty because of the pandemic and the economic reactions from that.
A subset of world wars, of course, is a catastrophic nuclear weapon exchange.
Yes,
That's a word.
yes. Yeah. And I was thinking too, how about a comet hitting the earth? Some of those big things that we can't control for sure. Yellowstone, volcano.
Mass ejection.
The super, right. The super volcano in Yellowstone could blow at any time. It's overdue. That's right.
The movie Don't Look Up.
Look up. Yes, that's right. Speaking of climate things, I want to share with you a few comments he made about fear driving a lot of this negativity about world conditions. The author says that he met Al Gore at one of Al's TED conferences in Los Angeles in 2009. And Al Gore, who of course is a climate proponent, climate protection person, asked this Swedish doctor for his input about how Al could transmit more urgency on this issue. And so the doctor said, "What do you think, Al?" Al said, quote, "We need to create fear. I think that is the way to create urgency." He said, Al Gore asked me to help him use and find the worst case scenario for climate change. I have profound respect for Al Gore, he writes in the book, and I still do. And I think climate change is a serious problem, but I could not agree with what he asked. I don't like fear. I don't like trying to drive things with the worst level, the worst case scenario level. Exaggeration like that undermines the credibility of well-founded data. I insisted that I would never share with him a worst case scenario, but I would a balance with the best case scenarios. Al Gore continued to press his case for the worst case scenario with me and with other expert forecasters until I closed down the discussion with him. The future is always uncertain to some degree, but we should be clear about not using scenarios on either extreme. We should ideally show a mid-forecast and also a range of possibilities because we never know what the future will hold.
That's why I stopped taking my environmental studies students to these climate change presentations, because they were doing this exact same thing. They were putting fear and guilt into these kids, these 14, 15, 16-year-old kids. And they'd walk out of there, it was doom and gloom. There was no mid-range on this stuff. And so I quit taking my students to those.
That's how you get attention. You know, Karl Rove told George W. Bush, if you want to win this election, go for the fear. Go for the fear. And he won the election. And that's as far as polls would indicate, that certainly has captured the minds of many Americans. You look at in comparison with Mr. Optimist, President Biden. You know, it's interesting, Steve, that Steven Pinker, at the same time, around 2018, published a similar book called Better Angels.
Yes.
Much of the same statistics and data was used that this proponent also has used in his book. But again, that was before COVID, before the Middle East eruption and the attack on Ukraine. So how much you know, this is factored in to our mindsets. But again, the fear piece, Karl Rove, that was orthodox. If you want to win an election, vote for fear.
Not only that, but didn't Rahm Emanuel say, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste"?
Sure. And this author makes that point that history, of course, does go up and down, and that there'll be improvements and there'll be setbacks and then improvements, but generally, on most of the categories, violence, poverty, immunization, we are progressing. Humanity overall is getting much better as time goes on, and especially has increased in the last 100 years.
So fear is driving some of this positive change.
Good point, Andy. That's a good point. That too.
I don't like fear, but it might be effective in that sense.
So what do you do with fear yourself, dealing with it? How do you get through a day without being torn up inside about what's going on? I know Ron's expressed difficulty with the political situation. You know, it's, what do you do to counteract this?
Scare of the week.
Yeah, well, whatever, you know, does he suggest stuff or?
He
I
does.
mean,
He
I spend a
says,
lot of time in prayer, but you know.
he says, hold the view that the media does focus on the negative and understand why. Seek out the good news when you can. And hold a big picture. Hold the thought that things are getting better, but that at any time too, something catastrophic could happen. So hold those ideas in tension. Be optimistic on the one hand and realistic on the other, but hold an overall optimistic viewpoint.
Easier
That's-
said than done.
Yes, right. Okay, a couple other interesting points I thought. In chapter 7, he talks about the destiny idea. People in rich countries have an idea that poor continents, even like Africa, are destined to remain that way. And he says it's not true. Many of the countries, including in Africa, have escaped extreme poverty and are improving. Western societies and cultures move often much faster than other parts of the world, but it does not mean that they are not improving. Look at the spread of the internet, smartphones, and social media, even in the African countries. Some people have an idea that Africa will always be a breadbasket for the world and never catch up to Europe. Another is that the Islamic world is fundamentally different from the Christian world and will never modernize in its ideas of women's rights or changing to modern values. On closer inspection, these instincts have fooled us. In many ways, Islamic countries are progressing. The idea that Africa is destined to remain very poor is no more than a feeling. Not all African countries are lagging the world. Tunisia, Libya, Morocco, and Egypt have life expectancies above the world average of 72 years. So in many ways, roughly 500 million people in Africa today are stuck in extreme poverty still. This is true, but it's not their destiny to stay that way. And I think that to leave extreme poverty will be the last to leave extreme poverty will be the poorest farmers that are stuck on low yield soils and surrounded by conflicts which they cannot escape. So some of those African countries are set for improvement. Others are stuck in not being able to get out of their situations.
Steve, don't you think that the communication, the internet, you can attribute the advancement of well-being of humans because the information that they so desperately deserve and need is helping them ask questions and changing things for them. I mean, that seems to be the driver in my mind is the speed of light has changed in terms of educating people.
The speed of light.
I had an interesting experience with my PCP the other day. He was new and I was just trying to make conversation with him a little bit. He wasn't new to practicing, but he was new to Denver, Colorado. And in just a conversation, I was asking him a question. The predominance of why people come to see you as a PCP. Do you have couple of things you could share with me as to why people come to see you today?
This is your primary
My
care
primary
physician.
care doctor. He said they
Okay.
come out of fear and anxiety and depression. That's who I'm treating predominantly. My patients are.
Your doctor said, just to repeat in case somebody can't hear you, your doctor said people come out of fear, anxiety and depression.
When they come to see him, that's why they're coming, is to basically get some counsel on how to overcome fear, anxiety, and depression. Wow.
Yeah, very good.
I don't know if that's different than it was 20 years ago. Maybe it was that way 20 years ago or 30. But that was an interesting reality to me.
Okay,
I wasn't
another,
there for that, by the way.
thank you, Ann, appreciate that.
I was there for a flu shot.
Good, okay. One of the other categories that this author said that the US actually is running behind in is healthcare. compared to many other countries. It says the US spends more than twice as much per capita, per person on healthcare as other capitalist countries on level 4, the richest countries. Says the US spends more than 39. No, wait, he says that the US spends more per capita on healthcare than any other country in the world, but 39 other countries have longer life expectancies. The answer is not difficult, in his opinion, and is the absence of basic public health insurance that citizens of most other rich countries take for granted, but many in the US cannot access. Under the US system, rich insured patients visit doctors more than they need to, running up cost, while the poor patients cannot afford even basic treatments and die younger than they should. Doctors end up spending time to treat unnecessary and meaningless care in some cases.
I've heard that they spend, that the US spends like 90% of its healthcare dollars on people during the last 10% of their life. There's not enough spent on preventive health.
Yeah, that's right.
Gotta keep grandma alive.
That's us, Jim.
He said another point he makes is that democracy is not the single solution to improving living conditions. He said, I personally strongly believe that a liberal democracy is the best way to run a country and can improve, but many other countries with different systems are improving. Most countries that make great economic and social progress are not democracies. South Korea moved from level 1 to level 3 faster than any country had ever done without finding oil. Of the 10 countries with the fastest economic growth, 9 of them scored low on having democratic principles. Anyone who claims democracy is a necessity for economic growth and health improvement is contradicted by the facts.
Is he saying South Korea doesn't have democracy?
No.
Because the one thought led into the other, that's why.
Oh, I see what you're saying,
Mhm.
yes, yeah. Maybe not necessarily.
Okay. New
Okay,
paragraph.
new paragraph, right, okay. Another category he talks about is the number of babies that in world population. World population currently is about 8 billion people. It is UN projections have it at going to 10 billion and then leveling off because the number of children is going down. The number of babies per woman has been dropping since 1984. So in all regions of the world, it says. So there is that old worldview that the population is continuing to rise with nothing stopping it. But UN world projections show that because of the less number of babies being born, families having much fewer children, many fewer children, that will slow the population at around 10 billion.
That's interesting, because I'm thinking of a J-shaped exponential growth curve.
Mhm.
And usually it would flatten out when we've hit the carrying capacity of that ecosystem or that biome, whatever it may be. And you're saying it's not the carrying capacity, it's other reasons.
That's what he proposed.
What do you mean by carrying capacity? Carrying capacity, in my understanding, when you start talking about population, is child survival and survival of diseases and everything, which is continuing to improve.
Yeah, and I'm just talking about the ecosystems in terms of, there's only so much water and food available in an
That's correct.
ecosystem. And
So in
once
other
you,
words, starvation.
yeah, once you hit that,
Starvation and everything being the carrying capacity.
the result, yes.
Yeah.
Of exceeding the carrying capacity, right?
The thing that bothers me about some of the things that are, and maybe I'm wrong, Steve, because I haven't read the book or anything like that, but it seems like there's a lot of of things that are missing. And one of the things that struck me, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but most of the numbers that he's thrown out have to do with per capita numbers. And we throw population growth into this thing, and population growth skews the numbers because we have more people to divide up the same numbers. And so it looks better, but it maybe isn't. And then the other thing that is missing, to me anyway, is fundamental politics and the impact of strongman leadership, which we're going to talk about in a couple weeks, is really impactful on Vladimir Putin can screw all these things, just one man can screw all these numbers and make them just totally irrelevant. And some of the people in the Middle East, some of the imams in the Middle East can do the same thing. And we have the orange man here that could do the same thing.
Yes, yes. And he
I
makes
think
that
there's
point in the
other
book,
things
he
that
says,
that are very significant, that are omitted, and their impact is omitted, and makes things look a lot rosier. One thing that bothers me is that rating, when he gets down here to the climate change, and putting that as number 4, but the one thing about climate change is number 1, the speed at which it is impacting things, and number 2, the irreversibility of it. And you start talking about even pandemics come to an end and people start recovering. We did from the Spanish flu. We didn't really cure the Spanish flu in the 1920s. We just outlived it. And other things, financial collapse. We've had huge depressions many times over the history of the modern world. But climate change is something that, we get it, we got it.
I don't think too many of us would argue that it's a top concern today, sure. And maybe this author would have written a little different than he did 6 years ago,
Right.
but all good questions. Let's throw it out for any comments. Zoomers, I want to give you a chance to comment. Susan or Grant? What do you think, Susan? Go ahead.
I was thinking a couple things with the advent of the digital age and, like mobile banking, that's contributed to upward mobility in Africa with the farmers and all the things that are enabled through that. And I'm wondering if maybe at some point we could have a session on the contributing factors of upward mobility throughout the world, because, that would pull it all together. And it's really fascinating. I mean, we're talking about the things that could potentially undermine upward mobility, but we've seen it throughout with these, these stats. And I'm wondering if that might be something we could take a look at some point.
What would be an example, Susan, of some of the things you'd want to look at?
Well, of the factors, I don't know. I mean, I think the digital age is one of them, but, maybe it's changing attitudes towards philosophy or religion or governments or participation. Well, yeah, we talked about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's a great topic. Yes, Grant, go right ahead.
Well,
Nebraska.
as far as the growth of the world, I believe Japan and South Korea are holding steady, and I'm not sure. I don't think it's been an official policy, but it's been something that the people in those countries have decided on their own to just have 2 children or even less. And their populations are maintaining and maybe even dropping. And we are probably another 10 years from that. But when it comes to the Middle East, they are rapidly expanding in population. The Muslim population is exploding. They have 6, 8, 10 kids. And so that is where the growth happens, but you when is that going to level off? Because it has so much to do with how much food there is. And I know we have here in the United States, in the 1930s, corn was, I don't know, 60, 70 bushel the acre. Now it's over 200 bushel the acre. And we've exported all of that into other countries. And so, but it's maintained on it's relative to the amount of fertilizer that is used. And from what I understand, and I know fertilizer has gone through the roof on the price, but from my understanding, that is part of the global warming system, which then people are saying, okay, we can't use as much fertilizer, so we're going to run out of food. You know, it's a give and take. And when you're talking about the 10 billion people, I remember in my high school in the early 60s, it was going to be an S curve of slowly, and then all of a sudden it's going to go up, and then it's going to level off at about 10 billion. I don't understand how they knew that, but maybe that's just human nature too. I don't know. So that's all I had to say.
Very good. Yeah, this book does not deal with the issue of how much food can the world produce to serve a specific population. So it doesn't deal with there'd be great famines past 10 billion people. But very good issue. Okay, we've got a couple minutes left. Final thoughts. Optimistic, pessimistic? Mary, go ahead.
Something related to extreme poverty, the displacement of people. For instance, what we hear about in Africa, hundreds of thousands of people displaced. And then that's related to immigration.
Yes.
So I think that's a big danger.
Yes, refugee crisis into Europe, into southern United States. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Jim.
If other people have not seen it, there's a great series on PBS called A Brief History of the World.
Yes, yes.
Very, very positive, very, very enlightening, and it really is exciting stuff. And I think it streams, you can stream it and binge on the whole thing if you want to, or watch it over. I think it's an 8-week series or 10-week series
On PBS.
on PBS.
Good. Okay.
It's really super.
And I'm gonna be presenting probably in a couple months. I'm a slow reader on a book called Guns, Germs and Steel.
Oh,
And
yeah.
why the European civilizations sent ships to the New World, but they didn't send ships to Europe.
That's a great read.
It is. Have you read it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
It's a
well
good read.
read, and there's a sequel to that now. God, I haven't read.
Very good.
The other thing I was gonna.
Well,
Oh,
go ahead, Ann.
well, if we get caught up on the United States of America, I think, and so lose perspective sometimes, at least I do, about what's going on in the big picture of the real world. But regarding population, we shouldn't overlook the fact that ever since the contraceptive pill came into being, we've got choices as to whether we want kids.
Mm-hmm.
My 3 adult kids who are all in their 60s, they didn't want kids, they don't have kids intentionally. I think you have a lot of that going on since the 60s. You don't think so? Yeah.
The emissions.
Yeah.
So, we're bringing it on ourselves to some degree.
Mhm.
It isn't that.
Yes. Good point. And that was in the book also.
Was it?
And that, yes, advancements in contraception and just healthcare, children not dying as often as they did in centuries past. So parents didn't feel like they had to have 10 kids for two to survive. That also fed into it.
Yeah, I just need to give a plug for next week. I'm gonna be leading on my construction mission that I took to Guatemala, so I'll be able to bring a bunch of slides in and tell you about those families that we built homes for.
Great.
I'm also bringing in a special guest, Laura Richards, who's in charge of an NGO, a non-government organization called Pure Vita, where when I was down there building homes, she was helping educate some children that were, and mostly the girls. To help bring them up out of poverty and be able to sustain their life as they become 18 years old. So, please be here if you can next Sunday and look forward to giving that presentation.
Good.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Okay, last comment to Joy.
I just want to say thank you for bringing in a more positive.
Oh. Thank you, Joy. Appreciate it. Well, there are a lot of-
I misspoke, it's not brief history of the world, it's brief history of the future.
Oh, yes.
Which is
Okay.
kind of an interesting name.
Yeah.
Like that too.
Brief history of the future.
Good. Okay, goes along with our topic. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Appreciate it. See you next week.
Thank you, Steve. Bye.
Bye-bye, Susan.
So